Well, welcome to Christian Answers. This is Pastor Jeff Short, your Bible teacher and cultural analyst. And today we are reviewing a book that just landed on my desk recently, and this is called The Case for Patriarchy by Timothy J. Gordon. And this book is one of the boldest and most outspoken books I have read in a long time. So what Timothy Gordon is basically arguing in The Case for Patriarchy is that he says we need to return to the Christian teaching that men are the head of the home, the head of the marriage, head of the family, and that we need to not be ashamed of the fact that God wills, God's Word, the Bible, talks about in terms of roles for men and women in marriage, in family, and in the church. And we need to not be ashamed of that. We need to just teach it like we teach every other important teaching in the Christian faith. And we need to organize our families around that, and our marriages around that, and our churches around that, and not give in or succumb to the pressures of the modern world, and in particular, the feminist ideology, the feminist philosophy that teaches that male and female roles are interchangeable and men and women are interchangeable, that you could have a family structure based on the woman working full-time and the man staying home with the children and raising the small children and even taking care of the babies at home while the wife goes to the office and works 40, 50 hours a week and comes home. And the man can be the cooking and homemaking, while the woman can go off outside the home and have her career and bring home the resources and have it totally flip, the role reversals flip. And that would work out okay according to the feminist ideal. And Timothy Gordon argues strongly against that and saying, look, God has already revealed the pattern, the system that marriage and family is supposed to operate under, and that system is patriarchal. Now, these are fighting words for the feminists today. Feminism has been around for around 50 or so years, but it's no longer like a controversy because it's been accepted pretty much everywhere, especially in universities, in the school system, education system, the law, government. Feminism is simply a part of the present reality, and Timothy Gordon and others who speak out against it are trying to turn back and go back to sanity, and that is the biblical case. Now, as a Christian pastor and minister, I am aware that feminism is the dominant cultural philosophy as far as the system that we all operate under right now. But I have been, for most of my ministry career, been speaking out against it and warning people and saying, look, this is not according to the will of God. The Bible is very, very clear on how a marriage is to be structured. And in fact, because of the feminism that have come into the Western world especially, marriages are breaking up. And we all know, I think the statistic around 50% of all marriages end in divorce. And there are some people that argue, well, no, it's not that much. It's only 30, 40%. And then there are others who argue it's actually up around 60 or 70%. And so, but 50%, let's just say, call it even and say about 50% of all marriages that take place end in divorce at one point or another. And why is that? Why is it that half of all marriages dissolve? Why is it that they fail, they flop, they explode, they blow up, they break up? Why? Why is this? Why is there failure on such a massive scale? Whereas before, in previous generations and decades ago, it was not the case. There has always been divorce. There's no question about that. You go back into history, and you'll find that there are records of couples that broke up, that separated and left each other, and so on and so forth. There's always been that. And the Bible recognizes that there has always been a problem with divorce. But the numbers and percentages of divorces was so small compared to what we are today. Nowhere near 50%, nowhere near half of all of the marriages that form break up. It was more like maybe the rare instance where you could go through your entire lifetime in older times where you would not know of any single one couple that divorced. It was just so uncommon. But today it's very common. It's common. It's so common that it's not even something that gets the news. And so what is the problem? Well, it's a new thinking. It's a new system that people are operating under. And what is that system? It's the feminist system. It's the feminist ideology. It's this idea that there is no hierarchy. There's no ordered hierarchy in a marriage or family or even the church for that matter. And that gender roles are like totally up for grabs. That in the modern feminist envision, you could have the woman be the leader of the home. Maybe she has leadership gifts. And so the man should just let the woman be in charge, let her go out to work the 40, 50 hours a week to bring home the money, and let the man stay at home and just fuss around with the kids, the small children, and feed them and make sure they get to where they need to be. And that's perfectly fine under the feminist model. And the problem is that is not in accordance with nature. It is not in accordance to the natural order. It's not in accordance with God's revelation in the Bible. And that the reason we have such large number of divorces in our culture, the reason why that most of the marriages now, there's a good chance they'll fail, is that there is confusion as to who is supposed to do what in the marriage and what are the roles of the man and the woman in the marriage. And there's that confusion. And then everything has to be negotiated. There has to be some kind of thinking everything through as to, okay, who's going to do this? Who's going to do that? Oh, you're not doing what we agreed to do, blah, blah, blah. Instead of everyone knowing what their role is due to their gender, knowing what their spot is, knowing where they fit in the organization of the marriage and family, and having it taught to them from the previous generation who learned it from the previous generation. And the church, in its part, was teaching the biblical model that the man is the head of the home and that the wife actually is called by God in the Bible, in the revelation of God, in the Word of God, to submit to him as the authority in the home. Again, this is something that Timothy Gordon is a rare individual author and writer and speaker who actually explains in very graphic and bold terms and blunt terms that God calls women to submit, yield to, listen to, obey their husband. Now, he even uses a little bit, I think his personality is such that he doesn't mind being the provocateur, you might say. But he actually talks in terms of, listen to something that is going to upset all the feminists in the whole world when they hear this. But listen to what he writes. He says, husbands are the indispensable bosses of families. Indispensable bosses. So he comes right in and says God calls the husband to be the boss of the family. Well, that is like putting it the harshest way. But, and it doesn't have to be a mean boss. It doesn't have to be a harsh boss. It doesn't have to be an unfair boss. but he's actually right in the sense that if you use the term boss as the leader, as the authority in the home, in the marriage, in the church, if you use it in the biblical sense, then he's absolutely right, although that is going to get a lot of heated debates just by using the word boss. But we've come to the point in our society where we need to start applying the strong medicine to the illness. We have a sickness, we have an illness in our culture. It's that men and women don't know what they're here for. They don't know their role in the family. They don't know their role in the marriage. They don't know their role in the church. They don't know the role in society. They don't have a sense. They don't have an inward sense of what they're supposed to do. Everything today is up for grabs. There's chaos, mental, psychological, spiritual, social chaos in respect to men and women relating to one another. And the only way out of that chaos is for men and women to turn to God and say, okay, God, what is your message to us? What is your revelation? What is your will for men, and what is your will for women? And in marriage, what is your will for a marriage? And how do you want it structured? And how do you want that system to operate? I've said a lot of times, and I've counseled a lot of different couples going through different problems. I've coupled in premarital counseling, couples before they get married. I've counseled with couples during marital problems. I've talked to men and women after divorces and all kinds of issues. And I can tell you from experience, talking with married couples and then divorced couples, that you can't counsel away a bad system. If you're going to approach a marriage from a feminist perspective, whereas everything is negotiated, everything is talked about and debated, and we have to decide who's going to work and who's going to stay home with the kids, or who's going to fix the meals every night, and who's going to fix the car when it breaks down, and who's going to be responsible for this. If you have to negotiate everything like that, and it's all up for debate, everything is for debate, and there are no givens and there are no assumptions, and you're not using anything from the Bible that has already been communicated by God. If everything is just up in the air, that system is going to produce bad fruit. That system is going to fail. And you're going to get what we see today in society. You're going to see divorces left and right. You're going to see every other person divorced. You're going to be, for example, if you go on these dating apps and you look at all the people on the dating apps, and people over 30 or 40 are almost all divorced. Some of them divorced multiple times, all divorced. You're looking at all of the wreckage of marriage failures. And you say, why are there so many people, millions and millions of men and women, who are the products of divorce? It's because they entered the marriage relationship with the wrong assumptions, wrong presuppositions. They were believing the lies of feminism. They were not following the biblical understanding of marriage. And that is that marriage is a patriarchal organization. That means it's a man-led organization. You organize the family, you organize the marriage, you organize church in a male patriarchal structure. It's not up for debate as far as the Bible is concerned. Now, here's the discouraging part. There are feminists within the Christian church, and they want to say, no. The Bible doesn't teach that men are the head of the home. The Bible doesn't teach that men are the leaders in the marriage. The Bible does not teach that men are the head of the church. It doesn't teach that at all. You have to understand the Bible was written in ancient times. And now, when we reread the Bible from our perspective today, we can realize that that was for them back then. But now, today, we have to adapt to the new reality. And the new reality is that men and women are both being educated today, and men and women are both being trained and knowledgeable. And so there's no need for that structure anymore, and so on and so forth. So these are feminists in the church that are trying to make the argument that the actual failed system of feminism that we've had for 50 years, that causing all of these divorces, causing all the gender confusion, causing all of the loss of common understanding of marriage and family, and the 50+% divorce rate in our society. Oh, that's a good thing. That's a good thing. And we can't blame the divorce rate on feminism, blah, blah, blah. So that's their argument. And I'm saying if a couple is operating under the feminist philosophy that, everything's up in the air, you just have to work it all out. You have to talk about everything and talk it all through. Now, it is true that in a marriage, and the Bible even makes this point, that there needs to be mutual respect and communication between the man and the woman, and that they do need to talk a lot about things. But there needs to be the understanding, according to the Bible, that when the final decision about anything happens, it's going to be made by the man. And that's what patriarchy is. Now, the feminists are always saying we need to smash the patriarchy. That's the big phrase, smash the patriarchy, that you'll hear today. You'll hear it from women, especially at the university and college level, academics, and you'll hear that from the radical left and the radical left candidates like Kamala Harris and some of these Hillary Clinton and the far left. You'll hear terms talking about smash the patriarchy, and women should be able to work full-time outside the home, whether they have kids or not. And you have a woman, Governor Kathy Hochul in New York, who's pushing for public-funded, government-funding daycare for women so they can go out and work 40 hours and 50 hours a week. They can pursue their career even though they just gave birth to a child. They need that free services from the government, so they need paid childcare and so on and so forth. Again, this is a feminist-driven agenda. The problem is that is the whole problem with the divorce rate today. Part of the breakdown of our society is because men and women, again, are trying to do this interchangeability gender roles. And you get this whole confusion about transgenderism. No wonder transgenderism was this big thing a year or two ago. And everywhere you turn to, and people you talk to, they're all talking about transgenderism, and Bruce Jenner has become a woman. Bruce Jenner never became a woman. Bruce Jenner became a man who tried to dress up like a woman and look like a woman in some perverted, sick, twisted way, but he's not a woman. He never will be a woman. And no man ever became a woman, and no woman ever became a man. It's just absurd. Again, not according to the will of God. And the same way with feminism, you can't take a woman and a man and bring them in a marriage together and then say, okay, now it's up to you two to come up with the whole organization of your marriage. You get to totally define and plan and determine what the marriage structure will be. And whatever you come up with, that's what you have decided, and you can go with that, and that'll work out just great. No, it won't. That's why God instituted marriage, and he structured marriage, and he instructed us in marriage. That's why the Bible has definite positions and clear teachings on gender roles. It says very specifically in a number of instances in the New Testament that wives are to submit themselves to their husband in all things as unto the Lord. Unless he's telling you to do something sinful, unless he's telling you to do something contrary to the will of God, if you're a wife, you need to listen and follow what your husband's telling you, because he has authority in the family and in the marriage. So you can't, if you go against that, you're going against the revelation of God. So you're trying to put yourself against the will of God. And we haven't had this taught in churches in decades, long time. We have not had this taught adequately. Now, there are some conservative churches that mention it once in a while. I think the pastor probably feels a little guilty, and his conscience is a little stricken, and saying, gee, I've been avoiding that message because I'm afraid I might offend women in the congregation, that they need to submit to their husbands in all things, as unto the Lord. That's quite an extreme statement. Yeah, that's what God says in the Bible. And it doesn't say the opposite. It doesn't say that men have to submit themselves to their wives in all things as unto the Lord. It doesn't say that. Why? Because it's not outlining a matriarchal structure of marriage. It's outlining a patriarchal structure of marriage. And so a lot of pastors are like, I can't teach that. I can't preach that because women will be offended. And they will be. Why? Because they have taken in the feminist ideology. They have learned feminism indirectly through the school system, education, of higher education, the institutions of our culture, government, law, everywhere. Everything is saturated with feminism. And it's brought us to the point where today a lot of young people are not even interested in marriage. They don't even want to get involved in that mess. There are no alternatives to marriage, only sinful behaviors that are false and fake and immoral alternatives to marriage. But there is no alternative to the biblical marriage. Now, you can get some people who claim, well, we're running our marriage totally egalitarian, we have all equal say, and the woman and the husband all have an equal voice, and they have to debate and talk it over and discuss, and at the end of the day, then they can come to some conclusion. But that will not work large scale, because God is wiser than the smartest feminists, and God is wiser than the smartest radical left liberals. And he knows the way the system has to work. And that's why, as a pastor, and as sometimes have to counsel people, I know that if a couple is coming in with feminist assumptions and they want their marriage fixed, I'm going to have to tell them, hey, you can't fix a broken system. You can't fix a fundamentally flawed system. You have to change the system. You have to revert to the biblical model for marriage. And that is that the man is responsible overall for the state of the marriage. And that he is responsible for not only providing materially for the household, he needs to provide spiritually for them and be responsible for the success of the whole thing, the marriage and the family, the children, everything. And the wife is his helper. That's the original model we see with Adam and Eve. God placed Adam in the garden, in this beautiful garden, but he had to maintain that garden. God had placed him in a garden that was already developed, and now it was Adam's role to develop that further and maintain what had already been given to him. but he needed a helper. So Eve was brought to Adam as his wife, and Eve became Adam's helper. And so her role is to help Adam do the will of God. So she's there as a helper, an auxiliary position. She is not the authority over Adam. Adam is the authority over Eve, and he's under God. So Eve's role is to encourage Adam and to influence him in a godly way. Well, we see what happened. She actually influenced him in a sinful way, because in the garden, we know the whole account of the serpent tempted Eve, got her to sin, and then she influenced Adam to sin. She drew him into the sin, and so it went downhill from there. So that's called the original sin, and then they were both removed from the garden, and here we are post-fall in the chaos that we have today. But the basic structure of the marriage was not changed. In fact, actually reinforced and reminded that Eve now needs to submit to her husband, and she is under his authority. And we need to teach that system, because then the marriage has a chance of surviving when there is structure. But under the current feminist marriage system, you can go into counseling every week, couples counseling every week. You can read every marriage expert's book. You can apply all the rules of communication and all of the stuff that's being told. You can go to every seminar, marriage seminar, for the next 50 years. But unless you change systems from a faulty feminist ideological system of marriage to the biblical, patriarchal, loving, wise marriage structure that God has given us in the Bible, unless you go to that, you're not going to be able to counsel your way out of the marriage problems. You're going to run into more problems, because it's not a matter of tweaking a system that is a wise and solid and sound system like the Bible's pattern for marriage. It's not like tweaking that. You can work with that. I mean, if couples are struggling with the biblical model, you can go to counseling and really get helped, because all you need is a little tweak, and you need fine-tuning and all that. But if you're operating under a feminist model of marriage, an egalitarian, so-called egalitarian model for marriage, and you're having problems and you go in for counseling, if that counselor is worth anything, he's going to say, look, you guys don't need fine-tuning. You need a whole radical flip to the true and biblical model for marriage, and that is that the man is the head of the home, the wife submits to his leadership, and there is order and structure. And there's all kinds of teachings that need to take place as far as the role of the man and his role as head of the home, and what that means, what his responsibilities are, how to love his wife, and so on. And then there's all kinds of teachings on how the wife is to lovingly submit to her husband in all things, and what that means, and how that works, and all that kind of stuff. But those can be adjusted and worked, and it can succeed. But the feminist model, that's bankrupt, and that's on its way out. So hope this has been helpful. We'll talk probably more about this book in the future, and we'll see you back next week on another program of Christian Answers. God bless.